Welcome back, my fellow duplicants, to Oxygen Not Included. Now, a couple episodes ago, you saw me build this little petroleum boiler right here, which allows me to convert crude oil into petroleum at a 1-to-1 ratio with a little bit of heat. However, one of the byproducts I had here was sour gas. Now, you've heard about something called a sour gas boiler. If you haven't, well, buckle up your seatbelt because it's about to get crazy. The interesting thing about a sour gas boiler, though, is that one of the byproducts is sulfur, which is a key ingredient now in our game, which is now a key ingredient in the Spaced Out DLC. The reason it is because we use it to grow our little grub fruit plants, and we can also use that for our grubs and sweeto critters. So if you can get your hands on more sulfur, you can build up more and more food inside of your base. Now, those familiar with the sour gas boiler also realize that it has a power positive element to it, so it can produce a little extra power and a little extra water, which is useful for oxygen. So what I'm investigating today in this experiment video is whether or not I can build a sour gas boiler that would work inside of the current Spaced Out DLC. And there's two primary limitations. The first one is that I don't have access to the high-end materials, so it has to work with steel or less. And because of that, I have to use alternative heat sources rather than very hot equipment. So, something like this magma down here, or possibly harvesting the heat off of our rocket exhaust. Or if we're really crazy, maybe even tapping into something like a volcano. And even though it's not quite in the game yet, we do know that nuclear reactors are coming online. I don't know how much heat those will put out, but they might be a potential heat source that will allow us to boil petroleum into sour gas. So the following is an experiment video. Now, this is basically the recordings of a mad scientist in his lair. So basically what I'm trying to answer here is, can I make a sour gas boiler and see just how much sulfur I'm going to get out of that, and whether or not it's going to be power positive if I can't use those critical materials such as thermium or supercoolant. But just in case you're wondering, this really isn't meant to be a tutorial. It's meant to be kind of inspiration. You can definitely dig out the details and explore it yourself if you so wish. So let's jump on into the experiment. If you're not familiar with how a sour gas boiler works, here's the core of it. Essentially, we're starting off with crude oil at whatever temperature it is. Once that goes above 400 degrees Celsius, it turns into petroleum at a 1-to-1 ratio. If you go hotter than that, up to 540 degrees Celsius, it then will convert into sour gas. At that point, if you cool it down below negative 162 degrees Celsius, you end up with 33% sulfur and 67% methane. At that point, heating up the methane will convert it back into natural gas. At that point, you can do all sorts of things with the natural gas. You can run it through generators, which produces water and carbon dioxide, and it really snowballs. But the core of the system is something quite simple. You have a very hot side and a very cold side, and you stick your crude oil in there, and it comes out with all the byproducts you want. So I've put 10 kilograms of it in right here. See that? 10 kilograms. And we're just going to cool this down. So using the sandbox tool, I'm going to go over here to the heat gun, and we're going to go minus 100 degrees Celsius. There we go. We'll get it real cold. All right, so there we go. Now we've got some natural gas, a little bit of methane, and sulfur. Let's just heat that up just a little bit so we end up with just natural gas and sulfur. So when we cool down the sour gas, that's when it splits into both sulfur and methane, which is pretty useful because that sulfur is going to be relatively cool, pretty close to negative 170 degrees Celsius. And as you can see right here, 33% of your sour gas is going to come out as sulfur. So the rest of that ends up as natural gas. All right, so in order to cool this stuff down to negative 160 degrees Celsius, and doing it without supercoolant, brings up a big challenge. Why? Because supercoolant is just incredibly powerful. It can go all the way down to negative 271 degrees Celsius, and it has specific heat capacity of 8.4, thermal conductivity of 9.4, just very, very effective. And since we don't have this, it's out of the question. So water and its alternatives, salt water, polluted water, all that stuff, are all really close to the specific heat capacity of 4.1. So it's really quite effective when you take this and you run it through something like an aqua tuner. The thing is that you can't get that very, very cold because then it will just freeze the pipes. The other way to get around that is if you have very small quantities running through the pipes, then you're running 1.2 kilowatts for a very small amount of liquid, 1/10 of that. So that would be 58,000 DTUs if we're running water there, instead of 585. Now here's where things are a little bit deceiving. The thermal regulator over here shows that it's only going to do 14,000 DTUs, but it's looking at oxygen. And it depends on what type of gas or liquid that you're running through these things in order to see how much it's going to change. So if we go back to our gases, what we find out here is that our hydrogen gas is capable of going all the way down to negative 252 degrees Celsius. So it can go cool enough to actually get us to turn sour gas into, liquid methane and sulfur. And it has a specific heat capacity of 2.4. As compared to all the other gases, I think that's the highest that's capable of going that low. So that's going to be what we use. And to give you some sort of idea here, if we take a look at our utility, oxygen has a specific heat capacity of basically 1. So when we run our thermal regulator on hydrogen, it's actually going to put out 2.4 times as much DTUs. So when we take this thermal regulator and we run it on hydrogen, we're actually moving 33.6 thousand DTUs for 240 watts. All right, so I know that I'm going to use gas pipes to run hydrogen through thermal regulators, but how am I going to make this work? All right, so here's my plan. I'm actually going to use 2 systems to try to cool this down because I'm not really moving a large volume of cold stuff. We're only moving 1 kilogram per second. So what I want to try to do here is to use 2. So here's what I'm going to do. I've just got I've got gold tiles, steel pipes. We'll do this number just like so. And then I'll do that number just like that and bring this right back down. So all I'm doing is running cold, and I'm going to bring it in from the bottom and then move up. I've kind of learned that doing this, having the coldest at the bottom, allows the temperature here to kind of gradually go to the point until it hits a critical spot, and then it all just kind of stabilizes right there. It just makes it run a little bit better. So that will be just like so. And then somewhere down here, I'm going to need as many thermal regulators as I can actually run. The more I throw at it, the more power I'm going to have, the colder I can get that hydrogen. However, I don't want it to get too cold, so it's kind of a balancing act. Technically, I can run 8 thermal regulators off of one 2 kilowatt wire. So I think I will do that. All right, so here's what I got going on. I'm going to have 4 thermal regulators down here. These are made out of steel, so nothing too special. And then there's going to be a second row of them right down here. And these 2 are going to be made out of steel. So what I want to do is I want to be able to take a gas in here and then have it jump out and then jump over again. Okay, so here's what I want to do. If the temperature is high enough, I want it to jump through one thermal regulator, and if it continues to stay high enough, I want it to jump through all of them. Otherwise, if it gets down to a point where it's cold enough, I want it to kind of skip all of these things and just go out the other end nice and cool. So depending on whatever the temperature of the input gas is, that will kind of determine how many of these things it actually hits. And then we get the output temperature. So I'm going to put a gas pipe thermal sensor in right here before each one of these, just like this. So if it is above, then we will run it in here and it will come out there. Otherwise, if it's not, then it's just going to pass right by it, and then we'll bridge it right back onto itself, just like that. Boop. So then it will bypass. And then we take this one and we tie it into the next one. We check the temperature again. If it's above a certain amount, it runs through there, comes out here. Otherwise, it goes like that. So each one of these drops is going to be 14 degrees Celsius. Now, just to make sure I keep the temperature in check, what I can do is just put a steam turbine right down here. Ha! Well, it's looking pretty good. Let's go into the automation real quick, just like so, and connect all of these. Now, these are actually all going to be set to the same temperature, I believe. So basically, I want to get the gas down to that temperature. So if it's not there yet, then we just run it through whatever thermal regulator it's at, right? So its condensation point is negative 252 degrees Celsius. So if this is above negative 200, and let's say negative 240, then that's what I'm going to use. That'll be the same setting on all of these. Here we have it. All of these can be plugged into the exact same wire, just like that. So after doing the math, right here we have 268,000 DTUs that we can remove every time we run the gas through the full loop. So that's a lot lower than what we'd get running an aqua tuner on supercoolant, but this is what we have to work with. So the real question is this going to be good enough to get some sulfur out of it? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do here is put the gas reservoir, and I'm going to put this on the output. I kind of want to stabilize the temperatures before I run them in here. So I can kind of, you know, as the temperature might vary a little bit coming through here, this should even it out. So we'll run up here just like that, and just like so. Now I'm just using ceramic insulated pipes here, nothing too crazy, but then again, we're kind of operating in a vacuum. This is still very much an experimental build, not quite something you would deploy. I just want to see how it works. Okay, so here's what I got. Thermal regulators right here. All of these are looking for the temperatures in the pipe. And then I have my gas reservoirs over here, and they are pretty much just full right now. Just go ahead and hook up a little bit of automation to these, and I'll kind of show you the cycle that the gas will take. So when I click this, we'll send the gas off, just like that. 1 kilogram packets. These are going to flow around just like this, and that will cool down these gold metal tiles right here. And any gas that's passing through here will interact with that metal tile. If it gets cold enough to the point where it's liquid, it'll turn to liquid and then drop right on down. The reason I do this is so that it doesn't get too cold. There's something about interacting with a tile horizontal like that. It just suddenly stops interacting, and I don't end up spending more energy making it colder than it needs to be. So once it gets to the bottom, that's where I want to pump the liquid out, and that's going to be methane. I'm not even going to worry about how much is down there. If there's enough to pump, then we'll pump it. Now the real question here is, where do I take this methane? Because it is really, really cold, and it's going to expand out into natural gas. But once it does that, it's still going to be down there at right around negative 150 degrees Celsius, which is really, really cold. And what we can use to make this way more efficient is we can use some of that and pre-cool a lot of the material that's coming out of here. So this is sour gas, really, really hot, and we'll pre-cool it using the natural gas. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this tile right up here, and I'm just going to mess with it a little bit. I know this is just kind of a proof of concept, but I'm tweaking it already. I'm going to build this out just like so. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to destroy that, right? Just like this. So right here is where I'm going to expand my liquid methane into natural gas. So the idea is to have the dropper right here. So that's the coldest spot. And then as it moves left, it should heat up. Now to be completely honest with you, I don't think I'm going to be running a ton of material through this. So I think probably just 2 or 3 gas pumps is going to be enough. You know, but just to be on the safe side, I'll put a couple more over here. All right, so the liquid will come out here, turn into natural gas, and will flow from this side to the left, just like that. And then once we hit this sensor, if it's above, let's say 700, then these 2 pumps will run. If it's still above 700 over here, then these 2 pumps will run, kicking all that stuff out. All right, so that leaves this metal tile. What am I doing here? Well, we still have 1/3 of this coming out as a solid. Normally the sulfur would just build up right down here. So here's where I'm going to make use of that to kind of help, again, boost our efficiency. So I'm going to put an auto sweeper in here, just like that, and then a conveyor loader. And what I want to do is ship our sulfur through here as well. Remember, it's right around the same temperature. Technically, I could actually zigzag this one around a little bit more if I wanted to, although I don't think it's all that necessary. Now, there's a second thing that we need to be worried here when dealing with this sulfur is that it might get too hot and turn back into a liquid, which wouldn't be good. I also don't want the sulfur to be too hot in that it would just end up heating up my farms. So figuring about how much I'm actually going to expose this as a cooling method, you know, I kind of want to bring it up to right around room temperature and then get it out of here. I guess technically I could do like conveyor shutoffs like this all the way down. You know what, let's not get too crazy with it. Let's just do this number and see what happens. Boop. All right, so now for the liquid that's going to flow in. Here's where things get a little bit interesting. Because as we are exposing this, it's going to go from crude oil to petroleum. However, in my base, I'm starting off with petroleum. So depending on whatever temperature I have here, things might get a little bit interesting. One of the things I like to do is actually just take the liquid and store it up like right here, pretty close to the hot side. That way it absorbs a decent amount of the heat, right, as it's passively cooling this right out of the get-go. Tends to make things a little bit more efficient. All right, so here's what I'm going to do with the liquid. I'm actually going to bring it in here, So this will be the coldest, and that'll be the hottest, whereas this is the hottest, that's the coldest. So this should actually take a decent amount of the energy out of it. And then I'll drop it right there, so long as I have enough pressure here. So what I'm going to use on this side to control the, how much I'm putting into this thing is just going to be an Atmos sensor. And I kind of just want to get an idea of how much pressure I'm putting in here, because as we move through here, we should have a high pressure side and then a low pressure side as things are turning into a liquid. So if the pressure over here goes below 1 kilogram, then it's going to turn on, or whatever number I set there. Okay, so now to control this door down here, I'm going to need a thermal sensor. I'm actually going to put it in this tile right there, run that automation wire in, and there we go. So if this goes above 450 degrees Celsius, then it will become active and it will run. Although I don't want to do it right now because I'm kind of in startup mode. And right now everything's in a vacuum, so the temperatures and stuff and pressures are not actually talking to each other. But I think I have everything, for the most part, set up. So after a lot of setup, I think everything is ready. Let's see how this thing works. What I really want to get out of this is some sort of idea of how much sulfur I can actually get out of this, and if it's going to be power positive or power negative. So I've got all of these thermal regulators down here running, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to cool all of this hydrogen down to its minimum amount, right? And it's going to take a little while for that to get there. We've also got some liquid flowing in right here, and this is currently active because it is below 1 kilogram. We're actually sitting in a vacuum. So we'll see that flow in. And the first thing we should see here is that this petroleum is going to heat up and possibly flash on over to sour gas. But what I want to do is close this door, make sure that that happens. I might want to flip that real quick, not to get too much in there. It's one of those things where things aren't stable until it's up and running for a little while. But here we go, we're getting close. Coming up on the temperature right there. Now we've got some sour gas. Yes, just what I wanted to see. So now I can set this to below, let that run, and we'll see what happens. So you can see here we reached the maximum temperature. Matter of fact, I got all the way up to 600, and now things are flowing over here like this. So if I take a look at the heat, you can see that we're definitely cool over here and everything else is hot. This here is not going to look, cool until we actually get stuff running consistently through it. So you can see all of these things running as hard as they can go. Matter of fact, we do have a lot of thermal regulators that are looking a little bit toasty. Might be the right idea to bring the liquid out right here from the steam turbine and then kind of let it trickle around. I like that a little bit more. And then just run airflow tiles right down here. Boop. And from the looks of it, that's going to get a little bit too hot. So we'll just get a pump it running. There we go. There we go. And now the heat's starting to come back down on those. And we'll kind of push that oxygen out of the way. You can see the temperatures that are coming out of these tanks. They're nice and stable. Both at negative 129, and on the way back, they're at negative 100. So taking about 20 degrees Celsius out of here. See the sour gas coming down in temperature. Notice that we got something cold enough over here to where we actually produced our first bit of sulfur. Awesome. So that is going to ship through the rail. 900 grams of it. And as I suspected, it got a little bit too hot. And now we have liquid sulfur up here. Whoops. Whoops. Oh no. All right. A bit too much. All right, so now we're getting down there where it's cold enough to where we could possibly turn some of this sour gas into methane. Right there at negative 160 degrees Celsius. So any moment now, we should actually kind of, hopefully, push that over the limit. You can see that the steam turbine has started to kick in a little bit. And the way that I have that water figured out, it's actually keeping these cool. There we go. There's a little bit of sulfur. There's a little bit more. Hey, now we're talking. And we have our first natural gas right here, although it is rather toasty. There goes a little bit more. Bloop. A little bit more natural gas. Hey, now things are starting to look like they're working. All right. Hey, now we're seeing some movement here. And what we can see is we're starting to now produce a little bit of power from our natural gas generators. Nice. And there goes all of that precious sulfur. Look at this thing go. Ooh, liquid sulfur. No. I might have to put another one of these up here to kind of grab that. I don't know. It's an interesting problem. The last thing I want is a little bit of liquid in here. And that's what it seems to be doing. Alright, so this tile made out of gold is just too powerful. let's use something a little bit slower. How about a little bit of iron? Oh, look at this! Look at this! Ooh! Ha ha ha! Alright, if I want to make this a little bit more efficient, here's what I do. If I put this on a little timer sensor right here, then it will run for about a little while, and then it won't run. And then it builds up, so then we get a decent amount down there, and we deliver a lot more. Alright, cool. That would actually probably help this metal tile situation here if I moved larger clumps of sulfur. So if I just only activated this every 100 seconds or so. So let's say red duration of 100, green duration of 24, then I should move larger quantities of sulfur. Now let's take a look at the temperatures here. So we're very, very cold over here on the right. You can see that we're definitely transitioning right here, right at the corner, which makes sense. And we're getting a little bit of pre-cooling, but not a whole lot. Again, we kind of got a little bit of liquid sulfur plugging up the plumbing. Can't have that. If I just hunt around for temperatures, it seems like this would be a better spot to run the sulfur through. Because right here, it's right around 50 degrees Celsius. As compared to this spot where it's like 100 something, and it's just, even though I keep messing with it, it's not working. Plan B, we'll go out right there, and we'll convert these to metal tiles. That way at least we get a little something out of them. Or if nothing more, at least warm up the sulfur. So we don't freeze our plants. So there we go. Now I'm going to ship it out right over here. Alright, so it seems like things are working here. Let's go ahead and bring in a little bit more petroleum. Oh, hold up. That isn't working as intended. I need an AND gate here. So now I've added the hydro sensor back in there. That's right. So that needs to be below, let's say, 10 kilograms. We're just looking to get a little drop of oil in there. We don't want a whole bunch. Alright, so that added a hydro sensor here that is below 10 kilograms. So I'm just looking for drops of petroleum in here. Temperature is still controlling that door. All I did is plug it in. I got rid of any sort of automation there. Ooh, I noticed the conveyor loader overheating. So we're going to move that. Ah, darn it. Once again, I'm still having liquid sulfur jump out of here. Sulfur's the main thing I want. So I think I'm just going to have to get rid of the whole idea of using sulfur to kind of preheat things. It's just too easy for it to have issues. We'll have it go right through here. That should be alright. Alright, so here we go. Now we're kind of catching up to it. The thing about a system like this is you always have to find the exact balance point to where you have just enough sour gas moving in as flowing out. Alright, so here's another change I made. I decided to run it through a liquid shutoff and then a liquid valve here. And I'm just kind of bringing this flow down from its maximum 10 kilograms per spot to just 1 kilogram. So I'm really slowing that down. The automation, rather than going to that liquid vent, is now going over to the shutoff, which is before the valve. I'm just trying to take this so I can tune in just the right speed here. And I have an idea of just how quickly I can run it based on how many of these thermal regulators I'm using. So you can see up here I'm using all 4, and then the last one kind of toggles on and off. That lets me know that I'm pretty close to having the temperature just right. If all 4 of these were running 100% of the time, then I'm probably not getting the right temperature out. And you can see the temperature here is negative 218 degrees to 217. So I'm like right there. So if we take a look at the temperature overlay, we can see how hot things are. Down here, we're at 600 or so. Then as we move up, this is 150 degrees Celsius, sometimes a little bit hotter. And then it gets down to 120. So we're not pre-cooling it below 100 degrees Celsius before we get over here to where it's actually solidifying. And you can see right where it's solidifying, right here. What this makes me think is that I can run a little bit more through here if I really wanted to. It also seems like there's another 50 degrees Celsius I could do with this natural gas. I could probably tune this to get it up to right around 200. Let's try this, a good old temperature shift plate. One here and one here. Maybe it's working. I do see, that might have a little effect. I see 160, maybe 170. Kind of depends on how recently this thing is cycled. This side doesn't seem to be all that much cooler. I don't think it's doing enough to care about. So I think one thing I could do here to make this a little bit more efficient is rather than running this gas pipe up and away, see that it's 135, 150 or whatever, I could take that and I can run it right through that metal pipe right there. And from the looks of it, only ever 2 pumps are going to run here. It's not an extremely powerful system here, so let's do this. We'll bring it in right here and run it down, and then just run the gas pipe over here. All right, now let's take a look here. Ooh, now it's all the way up at 400 degrees Celsius. Nice. It's taking a little bit of that heat with it. Now, one thing I could do is I could actually take that and put radiant pipes over here and then run a steam turbine off of that if I wanted to get even more out of it. I've done this enough times to kind of scrape a little bit of heat here and there. Just like I don't need 2 steam turbines, I could take this and, you know, bring it up here with the rest of these and then steam it off so I don't have polluted water. I just have clean water. Yeah, this whole thing could be cleaned up a little bit. All right, so now this is running through an active cycle where it's going to bring in some sour gas. That brings that heat up. Boom, just like that. But what is it over here? We're really not taking a lot of that heat out of there. You know what? Here's a crazy idea. I wonder if it'll work. What if I do this number? Ha! Okay, this is nutty. So what I've done is I took this gold metal tile and I broke it up so that it wasn't all just one thing. I think the heat was just averaging out. And now I'm definitely getting hotter gas over here. This is 180 to 200 degrees Celsius. And even though it fluctuates a whole bunch over here, I am seeing double digits every now and then. It goes between like 200 degrees. It is honestly, it's all over the place. Huh. But definitely breaking up this tile, it did something a bit unexpected. Okay, here's what I do. Now that this is nice and cool over here, this is when I put that temperature shift plate in. Because that's at 75 degrees Celsius. I really want this to be nice and cold. That should help even things out. And oh, I mean, that's working. Nice. That's actually working as intended right there. Boom. So now my inlet temperature to this is 70 degrees Celsius. Ha! What weird little tricks. All right, all I did is break this up and then put a temperature shift plate right there. So now the output temperature over here is right around 200 and some, and the input for my cooler system is right around 80 degrees Celsius, which means this might be protected enough to allow me to do this. Or, if I'm real crazy, I could do that number. Ooh, now my inlet temperature is right around 60-some degrees Celsius. Hey, now we're going the right direction. All right. So let's do this number. And you can see this is having an effect down here because my thermal regulators, now not only are the fourth ones running sometimes, but the third one toggles on and off every now and then. And even with that, I've upped the pressure inside of this whole system by 200 grams thus far. Let's bump it up to 1100. Looks like I got a little bit too greedy by adding these tiles. Interesting that that would have such an effect, though. The mystery. That actually went backwards. At this point, I can't explain why, though. Video game science, that's why. Alright, things are still looking real good here. Now, my sulfur is actually coming out at negative 45 degrees. I've actually been able to play with the timer a little bit, which plays with how much I'm actually putting on the rail, which ultimately says what the temperature is over here, because the less I'm putting on the rail, the faster it can change temperature. So I'm actually kind of able to control it a little bit that way. I know, so many weird little things you can tweak on stuff like this. Alright, so now that I got things tweaked in a little bit more, I've actually gone back and removed the liquid shutoff and valve thing. The system seems to be capable of handling a little bit more pressure differences. So it kind of jumps up over 3 kilograms, and then I let it go below 1 kilogram, and it seems to be able to handle that all right, which is nice. That's several less components that we don't need to worry about. Found a new spot to look at. If I'm looking at this tile right down here, I can see what the temperature is and what its lowest and highest temperature is based on the pressures that I'm putting through the system. So I noticed I just went up by 500 grams on the Atmos sensor, and that moved the temperature range for this tile about 10 degrees Celsius. I'm also noticing that the thermal regulators down there are they're running a lot. Wow, I'm surprised this thing is keeping up with this much. I set this Atmos sensor to 3 kilograms right there. However, what I can see over here is that I'm not maintaining my cold temperatures. So I think I'm actually slowly running out of steam here. So I gotta back it off. That is beyond 100%. What I want to see is the temperature of the hydrogen stable. Because if it's not stable, then I'm running it too hot. Alright, so after several hours of tweaking this thing and getting it dialed in just right, I think it's about as efficient as I'm going to get it here today. And it's running as fast as it will go. So this is set to 2.5 kilograms right there. We're also doing above or below all of this stuff. And this all seems to work. So what I want to see here is just how much power am I generating versus how much power does it take to see if it is power positive or negative. And another important factor here is just how much sulfur am I getting out of this. So I'm just going to let it run for a few cycles and then I'll crunch the numbers here. All right, so coming up here on the end of my test, I should see that I have 486 kilograms. If I calculated everything correctly. 485.7, 486. Don't run. Oh no. Okay, it produced a teeny bit more than what I was calculating. Alright, so after looking through the reports here and crunching the numbers, here's what we have. In general, just looking at the reports here, if you add up how much our natural gas generators are producing and how much we get out of the steam turbines right there, it turns out that we actually do come out positive. How positive? Well, as it turns out, our average net positive is 250 kilojoules, or in watts, about 418 watts. However, if we were to fit our generators inside of a power plant, we could give it a 50% buff. So that would actually work out to a positive 1,000 kilojoules per cycle right there, or 1,750 watts. Not bad, although it does cost you refined metal, so you got to get that from somewhere. However, the thing that we really wanted to know here is just how much sulfur are we getting out of this? Well, as it turns out, we're getting right around 81 kilograms per cycle right there. And after 6 cycles, we had nearly 500 kilograms or so of sulfur. So converting that into grub fruit would give us 8 plants per cycle. So I think the next question is, how many Sweetles or how many grubs can we actually ranch off of 80 kilograms of sulfur per cycle? Honestly, that's not a lot of sulfur. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more. But then again, if we were to look at some of these tiles right here, these are 500 kilograms per tile. And then after you dig it up, that's 250 kilograms. So every 2.5 cycles, you're building up another tile inside of your base for free, essentially. But that's another big question, because how much petroleum are we consuming? Well, we're consuming 246 kilograms per cycle or so. Let's just go with 250. So only 33% of that is coming out as sulfur. The rest is being run into the natural gas generator. In case you're wondering how I got this number, essentially it's derived from how long the natural gas generators would need to run in order to produce this amount of power. So I just kind of back figured that, and as it turns out, it's pretty accurate. Let's just say 250 kilograms per cycle or so. Again, it kind of depends on how big you scale something like this up. It being positive actually bodes pretty well to kind of maybe building it even bigger. However, one big limitation that we might have in the spaced out DLC is just how much space you have. This design here is not all that space efficient. Right now we've got one steam turbine here, another there. Those two can be combined. We definitely don't need more than 4 natural gas generators for something of this size. So we could probably get rid of all of these, just take them, put it up there, and that, shrinks things down a little bit. The real question is this heat down here. Right now we haven't really pulled too much heat out of the magma. So that is pretty good when you consider that I have a lot of magma available. If we can tune this to work with a volcano, then you'd have a continuous source of new sulfur and extra power, which would be pretty awesome. What I'm really curious about is just how much heat are we going to get out of something like the nuclear reactors once those eventually get added to the game. We'll just have to see. So the last piece of the puzzle here is how much water are we actually getting out of this system. Right now, we're getting 124 kilograms of polluted water out, and since this is hot enough to convert straight to steam, we don't have to worry about the whole polluted side of things. So now, when we take that and we look at an oil well, where we're putting in 1 kilogram, we get 3.3 out. So if we use heat to convert crude oil into petroleum, what we actually get out of this is 412 kilograms of petroleum per cycle, which actually gives us a net positive on our petroleum of 166 kilograms per cycle. Interesting. Which actually gives us a positive of 166 kilograms of petroleum per cycle that we could actually use for even more power, possibly running that through something like a petroleum generator, which will then produce a lot more polluted water. So that's a pretty cool thing, because now we kind of have a snowball effect. In a system like this, the only thing that we are actually consuming is heat. So to summarize, everything that this system is doing here is it is converting heat into power, into water, which can be turned into oxygen, and into sulfur, which is food. So while something like this seems quite complicated to actually build and set up inside your game, I have actually done it a couple of times. You can see why you might want to actually pursue that, because it is a very sustainable way to maintain a base. And we can get heat from various spots that are actually self-sustaining. So for example, a carbon dioxide rocket. One thing I didn't talk about here is how much carbon dioxide we're actually producing per cycle, because we have a positive of that. Matter of fact, that is 41 kilograms per cycle, which can be used to fuel up a rocket, to fly out, to do some things, to come back, which produces heat, which we can possibly use down here to generate some more sour gas. I don't know if the carbon dioxide rocket itself gets hot enough, but I know a petroleum rocket, if we ever get that engine back, it will definitely get hot enough. So there's definitely a lot of plus sides to doing something like a sour gas boiler. And this right here is just a proof of concept. The real trick is, can we actually set this up to run inside of our game? So I think this is a pretty cool thing. You can see that it is actually self-sustaining, but not self-sustaining in the same way that we've seen with supercoolant and all of those fancy tricks. Right now, we're just using thermal regulators to do their thing, which means that we really got to convert things into petroleum and use that petroleum to generate heat for us so that we can actually produce enough heat to kick off this whole chain reaction. Fancy stuff. At any rate, that's all I got time for today. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this little episode here of Oxygen Not Included. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Stay awesome. Peace. Brothgar.